Welcome to a special edition of Extreme Reloading. In this special edition, we're going to be loading about 20 rounds of this new Alpha brass. Now this stuff, you may have caught my review on this brass. This is 308 Winchester. Purchased this stuff a little while ago. Never loaded, never shot it before. Did a previous video reviewing it, looking at its consistency and comparing it to Lapua and a bunch of other 308 brass. Well, now I'm getting to the point where I am going to load this and going to go out to the range and test it. Is it going to be really any different than my Lapua brass or my Federal brass or anything like that? I don't know. There's a couple of interesting things about this brass, this Alpha Munitions brass, and one of those things is what they call the stepped primer pocket. Now the stepped primer pocket has the possibility or the potential to modify or improve the way that the primer ignites the powder. Perhaps it will improve the consistency at which that powder gets ignited, which may translate into real-world observations. In other words, we may see lower standard deviation of muzzle velocities than what we've seen in the past. Now I've seen and I have received single-digit standard deviation of muzzle velocities with other brass, Lapua, Federal, and so on and so forth. So I don't know if that's really going to happen with this particular brass. I'm also interested to see how it compares in precision. You may have seen our previous 30-shot group with Lapua brass and Sierra tipped Match Kings. And I'm wondering if this same load in Alpha Munitions brass is going to produce even better results. So I'm going to be loading 20 of these rounds. May as well do 20 while I'm at it. And the load in particular will be using CCI large rifle bench rest. These are the BR2 primers, kind of my go-to favorite primers. I really like the CCI. I also like a lot of the Federal premium primers. We're going to be using this, and I'm going to be seeding those primers using this 21st century primer seeding tool. I think the world of this thing. Gosh, is this good. I can control things down to a thousandth of an inch with this precision head that's on this seeding tool. Then I'll be charging those cases with 42.9 grains of RL15, and finally topping it all off with these Sierra tipped Match Kings. I've been shooting these things for years. 168 grain tipped Match Kings. I can't beat them. I've tried a whole bunch of different bullets and just can't beat the performance that I get with these in my Ruger precision rifle. So let me get to work loading these things up, then I will meet you out at the range. They're doing pretty good down there. Let's take a look at the results of this range session. You just saw I shot 2 groups with this Alpha Munitions brass, and the very first group that I shot was not very good. 1.6 MOA group, and that represents a 99th percentile of what this gun is capable of shooting. Now, I say that with some statistical confidence. If you saw our previous 30-shot group that we did with the same bullet, the Sierra tipped Match King, in the Lapua brass, I did a 30-shot group, and from that large group size, I could calculate the probability of getting a certain size group. In other words, I have an average or mean size group, certain standard deviation of those group sizes based on mean radius or distance to centroid, and a 1.6 MOA group is in the 99th point something percentile. So not that good of a group. You can catch up, by the way, on that entire 30-shot group video. I've linked it in the description below. Now, I'm glad that I shot the second group. I had planned to do that all along because it turned out really well. 0.9 MOA group. This is sub-MOA, as you can see, and it's much more in line with what I would expect from that rifle. Now, you might be wondering, or might be thinking, well, I bet that first group, cold barrel, blah, blah, blah. Nope. I always shoot some sighters, get used to the gun again, get used to the trigger. I always shoot a number of dry fire type of thing. So that was a warmed barrel, it was a fouled barrel, and no real other reason why I got a 1.6 MOA group and then got a much more respectable 0.9 MOA group the second time I shot it. So overall, the groups and the precision that I've gotten with the Alpha Munitions brass really just as good as I got or received with that Lapua brass. Yes, that one group fairly larger, but still within the probabilities, I suppose, but it is way on the edge of what that rifle is capable of. Second shot group right in there with what we kind of expect. But what about the consistency of those muzzle velocities? In other words, the standard deviation of muzzle velocities. You know, I'm really interested, or was really interested in this, because that Alpha Munitions brass has that different primer. We call it the stepped primer. So I was wondering, I was hypothesizing that maybe that's going to have an effect. Maybe a little bit too early to make that final call, but it did do very well. Let's take a look at those results. The muzzle velocities were averaging 2,500, well, 2,555 feet per second. Very nice standard deviation on that first group. The first group that did not give me a very good precise group size, but yet nice single-digit standard deviation of muzzle velocities, only 7 feet per second. But then just barely above a single-digit standard deviation with 11 feet per second standard deviation of muzzle velocities, averaging or giving us a mean of 9 feet per second standard deviation. Now, one thing that I've seen over the years, over and over and over again, is I'm really not seeing that strong correlation between the standard deviation of muzzle velocities and small group sizes. There's obviously a lot that goes into those precise groups, and muzzle velocity consistency is obviously is one of those parts, but there are other things that override that, and we talked about that in a previous video, so I won't hash over that again. But I really think that as long as we can keep our muzzle velocities to have a consistency or standard deviation below 20, if we can keep it into the teens, the lower teens, all the better, but really insisting that we get single-digit standard deviations is probably unrealistic, and we always get that. Wonderful if we can, but it's also not necessarily going to drive those really precise groups. There are other things that play a role, and you may as well spend a lot of your time behind the trigger and improve your skills, I guess, instead of maybe wasting some time with the, trying to get those standard deviations all the way down to just a couple of digits, 1, 2, 3 feet per second or something like that. We can, of course, get those 3 feet per second standard deviations. That's wonderful. But those are what I have seen over the years. Now, is Alpha Munitions brass better than Lapua? I don't think so. But I also don't say it's worse than Lapua. Very consistent brass. In fact, if you saw our first video on the review of Alpha Munitions brass, you might recall that this is a little bit heavier brass compared to Lapua, but it is extremely consistent. Very narrow tolerances in the weight of these individual cases. So it's excellent stuff. Definitely premium brass, right up there with Lapua. And if you're looking for brass and you find Lapua or you find Alpha Munitions, I would buy in a heartbeat either one of those. Perhaps the only drawback with Alpha Munitions is not price. It's pretty much exactly the same as Lapua brass, but it's the selection of calibers that are available. Lapua has a broader selection of calibers available or cartridges available compared to Alpha, but not a big gripe. I shoot .308 quite a bit, and so I can always get .308 Winchester in either Lapua or Alpha. Well, if you have some questions or comments or ideas on this video, please post those in that comment section below. Once again, thanks for watching.